everyone. I had to fight, as I'm Vilus, I had to fight for this session chair with Enrico. My quality of chocolates to secretariat seems to work better. And this is the last session in the auditoriums. Please, first of all, have a look at your badge. If you see a sticker of the color as Tom's shirt, probably you are among the Tom's fan club. In case you see that your ribbon is yellow, stay, because the topic today is about creating value in FIRST community. At least some of you and us, we need at least once per year write why we are members of FIRST and why we need to pay the fees, and then it's a good idea that to evaluate how much we gain from it. So Trey and Tom will elaborate on this topic, what it means to be in a community, at least that's my expectation. And by introducing Trey and Millar, from my experience when joining FIRST community, these are the two gentlemen who always find the gap somewhere, not a hole, a gap, and try to fill it with initiative, enthusiasm, and continuing in making community and things move. So thank you very much.
So thank you for coming to this session. It's a great honor. We've worked very hard to prepare some valuable content for you today, and we hope that you find something that you can take away and use. I'm going to ask that you put away your phones and your laptops if you can. We're going to make our deck available after this. This is TLP clear, so this is supposed to be recorded. Try to just be present with us and hear Tom, who needs no introduction.
So I want to start off this presentation by taking an axe to a very popular quote in our community, because I have a disagreement with it about how we use trust. And it's sort of like, it's a fundamental concept, but I'm going to maybe turn it on its head a little bit. So I think raise your hand if you've heard trust but verify before. Yeah, pretty much everybody. So this is actually comes from a Russian proverb, but it was made famous by Ronald Reagan. And I think of it as like, this is just zero trust by another name. Because if you're going to put the calories and the energy into verifying everything, then why would you even say that you are trusting something? Trust is a way of expediting what you need to get done. Verification is a little bit more expensive in terms of resources and time and all the other things that we don't have enough of. So trust is an expediter, and that's how I wanted to frame that up front so that everybody understands what we're talking about when we're talking about trust. And we are talking about trust between people, not trust between systems per se, like the computers that we work on all day. This is about communities of human beings. So trust isn't an NDA. Trust is not a contractual obligation. Trust is not a checklist. It's a calculated risk that we take when it's operationally necessary. It's a wager of sorts. So it's not about building the infrastructure, although FIRST, of course, has a lot of infrastructure to help build trust, but that's not all it's about. It's a culture thing. And culture lives in people, not procedures.
So here's another important point. We tend to think in absolute black and white terms as people, but the realities are nuanced, and so it is with trust. Think about, you might give somebody your house keys to walk your pet or water your plants or take in your mail while you're on vacation, but you wouldn't necessarily give that same person root on some box. And you might not give any of those people your spouse's personal WhatsApp, because trust is contextual. So the design implication for this, and here's a pattern you'll see throughout this talk, is we're trying to identify some elements and give you some design principles that you can possibly take away and use. So Here's the first one that I'll say: build systems for graduated trust levels. If you want to trust somebody, you have to start somewhere. So enabling provisional access and contextual judgment calls gives you that way to streamline through the mission when you need to call somebody at 2 in the morning. But you don't get to that level of trust overnight. Trust is established not through credentials or, security clearance. What does that tell you?
What about people with CISSPs, Trey?
Well, it tells you that they're good at filling out web forms before it's too late. But what is a security clearance but a sort of a letter grade on your parents' parenting skills? That doesn't tell me whether I can trust you. It doesn't tell me if you're competent. No, it's conversations where I see you asserting your values, where I see you speaking truth in an awkward situation, when I see your competence under stress, when we have shared history. Often when you work on incidents, you can even form trauma bonds within a team. This is the case. Has anyone ever experienced this? Where your team starts to feel like family to even an unhealthy degree, right? So you don't want that. But the design implication is that trust must be earned through demonstrated action and shared experience, not through credentials or organizational affiliation alone. And this leads us to our next point, which is humans, we're animals. Sometimes we forget this because we spend so much time interacting with machines and cold logic and our science, which is so dear to us. But we are made out of meat and hormones. And we have mirror neurons within us. If I start to mirror your body language in a conversation, you're automatically, unless you're trained to withstand this, you're automatically going to sort of open up. This is how you activate empathy between people. So if you're going to think about, do I trust this person or not? I think about the first time I met Tom. I had a wildly different idea of who Tom was. This was like 13 years ago. So I saw him, and I was like, this is not a typical what I imagine a U.S. government official looking like. So I began to ask some sincere questions, and beverages were consumed, and soon I started to learn what matters to Tom, which is different from learning what matters to the U.S. federal government. Before I began assigning roles and obligations and forcing you to take off your non-existent tie for me, I met you where you were at. And so the design implication is, if you want to know if you can trust somebody, how can you tell that if you don't know what matters to them? So, have you asked the team members that you rely on every day, what do they do in their spare time when they're not breaking their heads over computers? Do you know what their hobbies are? Do you know if they, go to church or have a girlfriend or a personal life? Do you know this stuff? Do you know what matters? Do you know what it's in service of? Because if you don't, how can you know what the person's ethics are aligned with? How can you really know if you trust a person? Tom?
So, when do we use the trust that we've created? And the answer is every time it's necessary to use it. Trey already mentioned the 2 a.m. phone call, right? So this is trust, a high-functioning trust community also knows that, that 2 a.m. phone call might be somebody's breaking point, but good trust survives stress. Trust is about that late-night call. Trust is about the email that somebody doesn't send, spilling the beans on the incident that happened at your organization that you need their help with. And trust is about, doing favors and returning favors without keeping score. So, all trust networks, high-functioning trust networks, do need to be built for edge cases like that. And that's how we can help each other deal with cross-border incidents, cross-organizational incidents. That's why we're here to talk about this today.
If you lean on somebody, if you give them the space of trust, they can disappoint you, So it's not just knowing that they'll pick up the phone call at 2 a.m., it's knowing that they're going to do the right thing.
So, who has a story of sometimes when they trusted somebody and they breached a code of conduct or forgot which TLP color something was and messed it up? Anybody?
I wish I could say I never made a mistake.
So one of the things that we believe that we can do wrong in a community is that when somebody does break TLP, you just sort of boot them out of the community altogether, right? We're not built like that. Everything is potentially a teachable moment. Everything is an opportunity to coach, to understand, to, without assigning blame, to try to bring people back into the fold, because you might still need that person when that incident goes off or that vulnerability pops up on a Sunday. You might still need that person, so you should be recognizing that every problem that trust creates is also an opportunity to actually strengthen the bond. Now, Trey's going to talk a little bit about mold cultures.
Yeah, so mold. Who here likes cheese? I think cheese is a fantastic food, and I would love to shake the hand of the woman who invented it, because it probably was a woman. But, you might think of mold growing on cheese, but there's also, you can cut that off easily. Then there's like the mold, the black mold that grows through your bathroom, and you have to rip out the walls, right? Because it causes cancer and respiratory functions. We're talking more about that kind of mold. So in that moment of fracture, when somebody breaks your trust, you have an opportunity. Do you want to discard that relationship? Have you invested in that relationship? You might need that relationship. Our impulse is not to speak truth in that moment of fracture. Our impulse is often not to restore. Our impulse is instead to gossip. But when we start to tell other people about the fractured trust, then we are rapidly closing the door on the possibility of restoring that trust. You've maybe heard the expression that love and hate are very close, and so it is when a trust relationship fractures. This person might even become your enemy if you gossip. So you might think, do I want to allow mold to grow through my trust network, or do I want to approach it with care and intention?
Next.
So
Vilius reminded me that a lot of people in this room are not going to know what this word means, conviviality, so I'll explain it a little bit. It's one of our, Scrabble words, if you will, or $5 word, as we call them.
it's a good word to look up and use.
Yeah, but conviviality really just means, being social and inclusive.
Humane.
And that's really, that's what this part of the presentation is about, was like a real high-functioning trust system empowers participation without forcing full alignment. You need to design for voices that carry signal, not just rank. And you also need to understand, especially in a great community like FIRST, that cultural norms vary a lot. I'm a big hugger. There's some people at FIRST I shouldn't be hugging. So, not because I don't want to trust them, or I'm afraid that they might get germs on me, because that's just not how I am, I have an immune system. But cultural norms vary. I remember, there's an awesome FIRST member. I don't think she's here this year, but there's an awesome FIRST member from Malaysia. And for years, I would come up to her at FIRST and try to shake her hand until finally somebody corrected me. And now I know how to be more inclusive, accepting, and understanding cultural norms that vary. There's also norms around hierarchies that we need to understand together. There's norms around face and how that's treated in social interactions. So all of those things we need to learn together and make sure that our communities are as inclusive as possible, because once again, you might have cross-border incidents, you might have cross-organizational incidents where that necessary trust is with a person who's actually quite different from you in some ways. Minimize gatekeeping, maximize meaningful voice, and build for pluralism, not just uniformity.
So, trust is a noun. It's something you can say that we have, but trust is also a verb. It shouldn't be hoarded. It was interesting. Tom and I almost had a trust breakdown while we were making this talk. You think you know somebody, and then you try to make a talk for FIRST, and you find that everybody has different sort of, an approach. And so there was a moment when we almost had a trust fracture. There was a miscommunication. some late-night slide editing was involved and some email back and forth. But it was interesting reflecting on it as we were going through the design of this deck. It was reinforcing for us that trust is not something we just have, but it's a choice. It's a verb. So it shouldn't be hoarded. But large bureaucratic systems sometimes have to have their rules, and the rules can't be bent because they're perceived as load-bearing. So you may need to codify this in small practices like shout-outs, introductions, retrospectives that reflect gratitude back on those who help you, mentorship pairings, and cross-team shadowing, understanding how that team that works with you really works by embedding with them for weeks or months. Back-channel spaces where people can vent and be themselves without regard for hierarchy.
Hashtag pets channel, hashtag food channel. These are great places to just circulate with your peers and partners when it's not an operational crisis, but you can remember who they are, you remember what they care about. It's another way of building trust and making sure it circulates and doesn't stagnate.
How much different is a conversation when I see you a year from now in Denver, but then we start by having a conversation about your cat, because I've been liking the cat pictures for the last year on the Pets channel. Isn't that different? We may not have had any other form of contact, but now when I see you again and I meet you for the second time next year, we're going to have a different level of trust just as a baseline through this small kind of ritual. Sometimes, though, we get into a situation, who's ever had to cold call a company or an organization to try to establish a back channel that's not, I'm going to email you some IOCs, but I have to call and get the CISO or somebody on the line because I don't trust the email channel? Has anybody ever had to try to social engineer their way in an incident or something? So I'm talking about this kind of a situation when there might be some high-risk, mission-oriented need to grant trust. It's a gamble sometimes, and we need to acknowledge that. Sometimes in life, you just have to flip a coin. So this is why it's important to create those pathways for building early trust, for onboarding people, for seeing in small ways how they might react. You know, if you stay out until 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 in the morning at a first conference drinking, it's not great for your liver, but you know what? You got a pretty good idea if you call those people up at 2 in the morning, what's the worst you're going to encounter. So there's some value in that, right? So the design implication is to be thoughtful, try to build trust as you go, but also acknowledge that sometimes you just have to take a gamble. But take note, there are always heuristics that can inform your decisions. So we find ourselves living in this community of first, which was once much smaller. People who've been around for a long time talk about, oh, nobody posts on the mailing list anymore. There are too many people. People are shy. Oh, it used to be much smaller and everyone knew everybody. That's the world we live in. But what trust has maybe been changed in the first community by growth, we've become a trust-building network, and there's trust networks that build on the platform of the first community. So you have signal groups, you have Slack channels, and various forms of mass communication that people establish on an ad hoc basis. You're maintaining a trust network. You know you are. If you're not, you're probably new in this industry. You don't just do that once. Why do you chat in the chat group? It's not just so people know that you have a cool t-shirt on that day. It's so that you're sort of feeding and watering those ties that bind. It's not a one-time decision. Trust is a sustained operational practice. We establish trust so that the next time we need it, the next time we have to make that phone call at 2 in the morning, it doesn't feel like such a gamble. So we need to build our systems intentionally to support people who maybe need to raise concerns, who maybe need to speak truth to power, or share critical information, or request assistance when times get awkward.
So, as we wrap up here, the final reflection from us that we want to leave with you is the difference between a resilient...
Oh, don't leave yet. Sorry. We still have 4 slides.
Yeah.
I mean, it is us.
We have appendices. The The difference between a resilient system and a brittle one is not always redundancy. It's whether trust can circulate faster than fear. So,
When the shit hits the fan, are
Yeah.
you going to go to a SharePoint portal or are you going to call me? You know?
We know from experience doing this stuff for years and years and years that in a real crisis, information flows through the trust channels first. It doesn't flow through the approved NDA, checklisted, formal process. That is usually like whoever's on the call chain may not be the person you really need to talk to. If you know the person you really need to talk to and you've already established that trust network with them through a community like this one, that's where you go first. See what I did there?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So we're going to leave you with some things. We're not going to just read slides at you. But we did work really hard on this. We tried to establish an artifact that might be useful. So here's one that you can take back and use in internal discussions in your team. We've given you design patterns, but often they're compensating or contrasting anti-patterns. And these behaviors we can trust.
Yep. I could bounce through these, but again, like Trey said, we don't want to read the slides at you.
All right, so I'll talk about silent withholding, though, because that's the one.
Oh, that's your favorite?
That strikes at the early one about the restoration. So we're giving you a three-part framework, right? That you should be intentional, this is an action, it's repair, it's ritual, right?
Yeah.
So silent withholding, this is often where we do not step into that moment of healing when the fracture has occurred. Take these, maybe spend some time with them, discuss them with your teams. We have some further discussion questions.
Now you can take your phones back up if you don't want to, download the whole slide deck on LinkedIn or wherever we're going to post it after this. Go ahead and take a picture of this one if you want. These are the questions we think that would be really valuable to practice with your teams when you come away from this.
But you could ask, what was a time in a recent incident of stress for the team when you felt trusted? What are some things in the environment, in the working environment, that make you feel like you're untrusted? These are points of friction or points to strengthen. We don't get better, we can't get better until we can start to talk about these things.
Yep. Practice, practice, practice.
Here's our final slide. This is the one we'd say, take this away. This guy, Ron Westrom, did some... Who here has ever heard of this guy, Ron Westrom? Anybody? So I learned about him from this industry, but a different crowd in a different room. He was working in aerospace in the 80s, and he started to look at, why does somebody's plane fall out of the sky more often than somebody else's, more or less, right? Why does one company have better safety outcomes than another? So he identified 3 types of working cultures: generative, bureaucratic, and punitive. And these exist on a continuum. You can move from bureaucratic toward generative or toward punitive, but you don't just jump around. So it's a 6-page paper. You can honestly read it on the toilet on the way back. So there's no excuse not to read it. It's a really good read, but it'll make you think. So that's our challenge to you. And with that, thank you for your time and attention.
While lining for the questions, please be reminded to submit evaluations for this speech as well as previous ones which we have not submitted yet. And any questions, reflections, sharings? It was in Denmark 20 years ago when I was studying here for PhD in telecommunication, and I understood that for communication to happen, trust is a must, because otherwise communication might flow but will not have resulting anything. So that's my personal feedback. Thank you very much for having this talk.
All right, so let me ask the audience a takeaway question. Who here picked up some business cards this week? I have probably 20 or 30 that I need to go home and process. Here's my challenge. When you get home and you got your expenses, and you put the receipts over here, then the receipts that you're definitely not going to submit here, right? Because that's 3 in the morning. And then you got the business cards. Take that stack and pick out 3 or 4 and figure out, who am I going to try to cultivate trust relationships with in the coming year? That's my challenge to all of you. Separate out your receipts, not going to expense those. Separate out your business cards, going to invest in those relationships. And let's compare notes in a year.
Hey guys, cool talk. Thanks Trey, thanks Tom. My takeaway is that trust is something that is very deliberate, very intentional, that gets built up through very much deliberate action over time. But we're in an industry, or we're told that we're in an industry where things are moving at machine speeds and AI is accelerating the impact of things. Sorry, I had to say that. So there seems to be a natural tension between what the expectations of our industry in particular are in terms of the velocity at which things occur and the speed or lack thereof where trust can be built and maintained. So do you think that that is a challenge that's real, or is that a false choice that we're placing on ourselves by misunderstanding the problem?
So,
Can I?
okay, but then
Okay. So here's what I'd say to that, is that there is still always, if you want to set up things to move at machine speed, it still starts with some sort of trust relationship. And again, like I said at the beginning, trust is actually an expediter of information flow. So in order to get real infrastructure up and running that can do things at, like at the pace of, 1 million robots, then you still need to trust the people, and even in your own organization, that they have the competence, the ethics, and the right, sort of operational history to be able to do those things. And all of these practices would still apply in that case. Because ultimately, I believe that everything in cyber, at the end of the day, if you do your 5 whys of root cause analysis whenever there's a problem, it's going to be a people problem. And trust is about people.
And like, we work in an industry where, we're sort of the sanitation workers of technology, right? Technical debt exists, and people pay for cybersecurity because it's cheaper than going and fixing technical debt in a lot of cases, right? This is true. And so if we know that society has assigned us basically an impossible role, then just because there are expectations being pushed onto us doesn't mean that we have to blindly accept them. I know that the halting problem is the halting problem. And even if you come at me with $1 trillion market, I'm not going to just stop believing in the halting problem. So push back if there are unreasonable expectations being pushed on your team. As Tom says, people problems are often the cause. Throwing more AI at it might be an easy out for the CEO that's afraid to look in the mirror.
Cool, thanks guys.
Hi, in modern times, as it seems like misinformation and disinformation keeps becoming more prevalent and hard to navigate around, how do we keep this high trust culture between us?
Were you looking at me?
Yeah, I'm looking at you.
So how do we maintain a high trust culture in the face of a flood of misinformation? Boy, that's a really great question. So, if I know you, so, okay, if I know Tom, right, I might say, that text message Tom just sent me, that can't be Tom, right?
This goes back to the slide deck disagreement we had.
So I might say it's deepfake Tom, right?
Yeah.
This is deepfake Tom. Tom would never say that. But how can I say that if I don't have any kind of effective role model of Tom and how he operates and how he thinks and what's important to him? So people change too. This is why a lot of marriages break down, is because people have a world model of the other person, and then they start paying attention to the map and not the territory of the reality. And so their partner is evolving and they're not evolving their world model. So if I don't talk to Tom every couple of days or weeks or months or on some regular basis, how do I know that Tom hasn't become some kind of, evil person? People do change to be 180 degrees different sometimes. But if I maintain contact with him, then I have the confidence to say, this can't be. So I guess that doesn't translate to interinstitutional trust. Disinformation is a problem. Take a newspaper, that's my advice.
It is a real problem. I would say Yeah, everything Trey, I agree with everything Trey said, and I would say like that's the incredible value of this conference more than anything else. It's why you'll find me more frequently doing hallway con and talking with people and hanging out in the smoking area. I only smoke at conferences. Why do I do that? Because it's a great place to meet people from different parts of the world. So all of that is to meet people in person where they're at, find out what matters to them, understand them, you know, bring them into the, you know, the group signal chat that's planning the dinner outing for tonight. And then that way you have that person's contact info. You can say, how you doing every couple of weeks or so. And that gives you that baseline so that when misinformation does cross that wire, you can say like, I don't think this is quite what I'm expecting from this person.
Oh, so I have an answer. I used to work at NATO headquarters at SHAPE years ago, and I'm not going to talk about any of that, except to say that what you have there is a bunch of like military personnel, generals and admirals, and also enlisted people and everything in between, who come there on some secondment for their mission for a year or two or whatever, and they do the thing at the NATO headquarters, and then they go back to their national area. I spent a few years in that environment, and I learned to read all the sort of epaulets and funny hats, and my God, there's some funny hats out there. But I asked myself, what's the value of that? And I came to this conclusion that, like, if there's two countries that start to be in conflict, and you got a general here who's ordered to go attack the general over there, but they're getting some political messaging that, like, this side is all Nazis and we have to go kill them. But if this general and this general went to each other's kids' birthday parties 5 years ago, then you've got some back channel that exists for de-escalation, for verification before some tragic mistake gets made. So I would say this has some applicability to the domain of misinformation. If you start to build those trust mechanisms before you need them, then the human element can work to your advantage.
Hey, this was great. I feel like you kind of went through the foundation of what we're trying to do here. My question to you is this: if you can recommend 3 things, 3 actions, specific ones, which we can take home and implement them in the companies we work for in order to start building trust.
Well, so I'd say review these, maybe do a little bit of, you know, Googling, or ask your favorite smart friend that likes to chat with your pocket. Have a team discussion and read this short paper. It's 6 pages. It's a toilet paper. I didn't mean that.
So let's applaud again for 2 amazing speakers. So there's still half an hour before the closing session for surveys, as well as still having a chance, what you haven't done last 5 days, mingle, look at the business cards, collect more business cards to choose later on with whom you want to continue, or hug someone whom you feel about hugging.
Or, you know, if you want to build trust, you could also hack somebody, because if you're reading their email, then, you know, you can have that one. Thank you.